My fiancé mocked me for being a waitress at his favorite spot, until one dinner exposed a truth that left his future uncertain. "You're just a waitress with your talents." Derek's words echo in my mind as I stand before him, dinner check in one hand, ownership papers in the other. The shock spreading across his face is worth every moment I spent hiding in plain sight. I wasn't always the woman behind Evelyn's. 8 years ago, I was just another culinary school graduate with big dreams and bigger student loans. My grandmother's diner was failing, a relic of comfort food in a neighborhood rapidly filling with trendy bistros and fusion restaurants. When she passed, leaving me the struggling establishment, my classmates called it a burden. I called it an opportunity. The dawn of my first year as a restaurateur nearly shattered me. Endless days stretched into 18-hour marathons, my savings dwindling to resurrect outdated equipment, each rusty appliance a relic of dreams not yet realized. Culinary school had armed me with recipes, not the gritty realities of tax codes or payroll complexities, lessons I learned through sleepless nights and costly mistakes. I made a home on a cot tucked among storage shelves, trading rent for proximity to my vision, cleansing the day's labor at a nearby gym before Dawn summoned me to unlock Nana's diner for breakfast. In those relentless months, I became every role: dishwasher scrubbing grease, line cook wielding flames, server balancing trays, host greeting weary souls. Necessity, unforgiving yet transformative, sculpted me into the leader I needed to be. By the third year, Nana's diner had metamorphosed into Evelyn's, a haven of refined comfort food that beckoned, food critics and neighborhood loyalists alike. I still recall the tremor in my hands as I read the review anointing us Boston's hidden gem, a validation that fueled my resolve. 6 months later, the first Michelin star crowned our efforts, a beacon of triumph. The second star, earned last year, felt like a quiet nod from the universe to my unyielding spirit. Yet, amidst the accolades, Tuesday nights remain sacred, untouched by success. While my executive chef orchestrates the kitchen's symphony and Marco steers the dining room's rhythm, I slip into a simple black uniform, tie back my hair, and step onto the floor as a server. My staff once mistook this for overzealous oversight, but now they see it as my tether to our origins, a deliberate act to honor the roots that ground me, the perspective that sharpens my vision, and the service ethos that defines our reputation. The quiet roomer, the owner waits tables on Tuesdays, weaves through regular patrons, a charming secret that found its way into a Boston magazine profile. I never confirmed it, preferring the anonymity that lets diners speak unguarded truths, believing I'm merely their server. There's a quiet power in those moments, a clarity that only comes when you listen from the shadows of service, unnoticed yet profoundly present. It was a rain-soaked Friday, not my usual evening on the floor, but I stepped in for Tina, whose babysitter had vanished into the chaos of last-minute cancellations. The dining room hummed with the clink of glasses and murmured conversations, but my eyes caught a solitary figure at the bar. Derek, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit jacket, sat bathed in the amber glow of pendant lights, one hand scrolling his phone, the other cradling a Manhattan, its cherry glinting like a promise. "Another?" I asked, my notepad poised, voice steady despite the pulse of the room. When he lifted his gaze, the air seemed to pause. A fleeting, electric moment, the kind romance novels weave, but I'd never felt until now. His smile broke through his stern demeanor, softening his features, reaching his eyes with a warmth that felt unscripted, authentic. "Only if you'll guide me through this menu," he replied, his voice carrying a playful challenge. "I've been lost in these choices for 10 minutes. I felt a spark, not just of connection, but of curiosity, about him, about the story unfolding in this unexpected encounter, about the secrets I carried beneath my server's uniform. Recommending the braised short ribs, I watched his intrigue deepen, unaware that this moment would set the stage for a dance of truths and illusions. I recommended the braised short ribs, technically my grandmother's recipe, though we'd elevated it with a red wine reduction that took 12 hours to perfect. "I trust someone who makes confident recommendations," he said, ordering exactly what I suggested. Later, when he raved about the meal, I felt the dual pride of chef and server, a sensation only I could fully appreciate. Derek returned the following week, requesting my section specifically, and the week after. Soon, his Friday visits became so regular that other servers would automatically direct him to my area. He'd arrive at 7, work still evident in his expression, but would leave relaxed, lingering over dessert while asking thoughtful questions about my day. What began as casual coffee after my shift blossomed into something deeper, a series of dates that wove our lives closer together. We strolled along the Charles River, its waters mirroring the golden hues of dusk, our footsteps syncing with the rhythm of shared laughter. At a Berkeley jazz concert, the saxophone's soulful notes seemed to echo the unspoken questions between us. Dinners at rival restaurants became covert missions. I savored each dish while mentally cataloging their techniques, all while feigning the carefree enjoyment of a night out. Derek spoke passionately of his world as a commercial real estate attorney, his voice alight with pride as he described skyscrapers born from contracts he'd meticulously crafted, their steel frames rising as testaments to his ambition. "And you," he'd probe gently, his eyes searching mine. "What drew you to waiting tables?" Each time, I offered carefully curated truths, my culinary training, my affection for the restaurant's vibrant pulse, my unspoken bond with Evelyn's. I never lied, but let him weave his own narrative from my words, studying his reactions for glimpses of his heart. Beneath the warmth of those moments, I guarded my secret, wondering how long I could balance love and deception. Other men I dated revealed themselves quickly when learning I just waited tables. Some viewed me as a project to rescue, others as someone conveniently unambitious who wouldn't compete with their success. Derek initially seemed different, interested in my perspectives regardless of their source, respectful of the service industry in ways that suggested character rather than calculation. 3 months into dating, I witnessed something that gave me pause. Derek had invited colleagues to Evelyn's, seated in Marco's section while I worked across the room. I watched from the corner of my eye as a new server, just 2 weeks on the job, mixed up their appetizer orders. Isn't management screening these people at all? Derek's voice carried just enough for me to catch the dismissive tone. This is why they'll always be replacing names on their name tags. His companions laughed. The server, a single mother working toward her nursing degree, blinked rapidly to hold back tears. That night, I nearly told him everything. We were at his apartment, the skyline glittering beyond floor-to-ceiling windows, when he mentioned an upcoming client dinner. I need to impress these investors, he said. I was thinking Evelyn's. Your boss clearly runs a tight ship. Well, except for that one server. The words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched him from across the kitchen island, wondering if his respect for me was conditional, if knowing my true position would fundamentally change how he saw me as a person. The question haunted me even as our relationship deepened. The following week, seated at my reserved corner table without realizing its significance, Derek closed a major deal while I observed from the kitchen pass. His confidence was magnetic. His treatment of the staff was not. With each interaction, I compiled mental notes, measuring his character while protecting my heart from fully committing. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment to reveal my ownership. In reality, I was testing him, a test I desperately wanted him to pass, even as evidence mounted that he might not. As spring melted into summer, my relationship with Derek deepened, even as my deception grew more complex. 6 months in, we'd settled into a comfortable rhythm that required increasingly elaborate scheduling on my part. Mornings found me in meetings with suppliers, afternoons overseeing menu development, and evenings either in Derek's arms or managing service from behind the scenes. Except when he dined at my restaurant, believing I was simply clocking in for another shift. You work too hard for too little, Derek would say, kissing my forehead as I claimed exhaustion from a busy night of serving when I'd actually been reviewing quarterly financials in my office. The irony wasn't lost on me. But with each passing week, finding the right moment to reveal my true position became more daunting. I learned more about Derek's background during these months. The prestigious Boston law firm, where he'd become the youngest partner in their commercial real estate division. His education at Harvard Law. The summer home in Cape Cod where his parents had hosted senators and CEOs. His world was one of legacy and connections, old money that opened doors I'd had to break down with sheer determination. My father always said success is about positioning yourself next to power, he told me one evening as we shared wine on his balcony. That's why I can't understand people who stay in dead-end jobs. There's always a ladder to climb if you're willing to look up. I bit my tongue, remembering my dishwasher, Miguel, who worked 3 jobs to put his daughter through college. His definition of success had nothing to do with proximity to power and everything to do with sacrifice and love. Maybe some people find fulfillment in different ways, I offered carefully. Derek squeezed my hand. That's what I adore about you, Evelyn, always seeing the best in everyone. But trust me, nobody dreams of serving others their whole life. If he only knew that my serving others had built a business worth millions, now expanding to a second location across town. The construction updates came to my personal phone, which I guarded carefully around him. Despite these moments of disconnect, there were countless others filled with genuine connection. Derek's laugh, a full-bodied sound that seemed to surprise even him, became my favorite melody. He remembered small details, that I preferred lilies to roses, that thunderstorms made me anxious, that I couldn't stand the texture of coconut. On Sunday mornings, he'd bring coffee to bed and read me sections of the newspaper, his commentary making me laugh until my sides hurt. Imagine us doing this in Paris, he'd say. Or, next year, we could be waking up to this view in Tokyo. Our shared travel bucket list grew longer with each conversation. When he spoke of the future, I allowed myself to believe we could bridge the gap between our worlds. Then came the night Derek finally met Marco properly. I'd mentioned my manager frequently, and Derek suggested dinner at Evelyn's where the 3 of us could chat after my shift. Marco, who'd been with me since we survived that first brutal year together, knew exactly how to play his role, while subtly enjoying the irony. The restaurant industry is fundamentally about illusion, Derek proclaimed after his second scotch, while I pretended to be off-duty, joining them in casual clothes. Customers think they're paying for food, but they're really paying for the experience, the prestige of the reservation. Marco caught my eye, the corner of his mouth twitching. And what would you suggest is the most important aspect of managing that illusion? Strong leadership, obviously, Derek continued, warming to his topic. The problem with most restaurants is that ownership is disconnected from daily operations. If I owned a place like Evelyn's, I'd implement performance metrics for every position. The industry accepts too much mediocrity. Marco choked slightly on his drink. Fascinating perspective. Any other insights into our little world? I shot Marco a warning look as Derek launched into a detailed critique of restaurant profit margins and labor costs, quoting statistics that were actually outdated by several years. Marco's expression remained neutral, though I could read the amusement in his eyes, the inside joke between us stretching taut as a wire. Evelyn here has excellent instincts, Marco said finally, gently steering the conversation away from dangerous waters. She understands this business better than most owners I've worked for. Derek smiled indulgently, placing his hand over mine. She's certainly exceptional, though I keep telling her she could be using those instincts in a field with actual career advancement. The words stung more than they should have, especially with Marco witnessing them. Later that night, alone in my actual office after both men had departed, I considered ending the charade. But something held me back. Perhaps pride, perhaps fear, perhaps the unsettling realization that I still didn't know which version of myself Derek had actually fallen in love with. 2 weeks later, on a perfect autumn evening, Derek suggested a walk along Boston Harbor. The October air carried the crispness of changing seasons, golden light softening the city's edges as sunset approached. He seemed unusually quiet, checking his watch several times as he guided me toward a specific viewpoint overlooking the water. "This is where my grandparents first met," he said suddenly. "My grandfather was shipping out to Europe during the war. My grandmother came to say goodbye, not knowing if she'd ever see him again." Before I could respond, he was kneeling, a small velvet box in his hand, the setting sun igniting the diamond inside as he opened it. The ring was stunning, vintage style with a center stone that caught fire in the dying light. "Evelyn Matthews, you've brought something to my life I didn't know was missing. Your kindness, your grace, your unwavering support of my ambitions. You make me want to be worthy of you every day." His voice carried the rare vulnerability that always melted my defenses. "Will you marry me?" Time suspended as conflicting emotions collided within me, joy at the sincerity in his eyes, pride in how far we'd both come from our first meeting, anxiety about the secret still standing between us. And underneath it all, the unsettling question, did he love me or the version of me he thought he knew? "Yes," I heard myself say, tears blurring my vision as he slipped the ring onto my finger. The weight of it felt simultaneously right and wrong, like a key that almost fit the lock. As he pulled me into his arms, the harbor lights beginning to twinkle around us, I made a silent promise to myself. Before we set a wedding date, Derek would know everything. The question that haunted me as we celebrated that night wasn't whether he'd be impressed by my success, but whether he'd forgive the omission, and whether the woman he wanted to marry would still exist in his eyes once the waitress disguise was gone. The diamond on my finger caught the morning light as I packed my essentials into carefully labeled boxes. Derek had insisted I move into his Beacon Hill condominium. No fiancé of mine should be living in that tiny apartment in Somerville. After weeks of gentle pressure, I'd agreed. What I couldn't explain was how that tiny apartment was actually a convenient fiction. My real home was a brownstone in Back Bay that I'd purchased outright after our second Michelin star. Moving day became an elaborate choreography of deception. I transferred clothes, books, and personal items from my rarely used apartment while claiming my irregular hours at the restaurant made it impossible for Derek to help. In reality, I was shuttling financial documents, business plans, and the keepsakes that told the true story of my success to a newly rented storage unit. Finally, Derek murmured that first night, pulling me close as we stood on his, now our, balcony. "Having you here makes this place feel like home." His sincerity made my heart ache. Every genuine moment between us was scaffolded by falsehoods, a beautiful structure built on an increasingly unstable foundation. My new living arrangement complicated an already intricate schedule. Most mornings I'd slip out while Derek showered, claiming early breakfast shifts but actually heading to manager meetings or supplier negotiations. Afternoons required careful coordination with Marco and my assistant to ensure calls were screened and messages secured. Evening returns to the condo often meant explaining away the scent of kitchen spices that clung to my hair despite changing out of chef's whites into waitress attire before coming home. "Your dedication to that place is admirable, if misplaced," Derek commented one evening when I arrived home exhausted after a 16-hour day combining actual service and secret management. "Though honestly, at some point, you need to think about your future. Our future." The first cracks appeared 3 weeks after moving in. Derek's law firm was hosting a charity gala, and he'd spent days dropping hints about appropriate attire and behavior. "Just follow my lead with the senior partners," he advised while adjusting his bow tie. "They can be traditional about their wives' roles. I'm not their wife," I pointed out, smoothing the simple black dress I'd chosen, coincidentally similar to my waitstaff uniform, though significantly more expensive. "And I'm not yours yet, either." Derek's smile didn't reach his eyes. "But you will be. And first impressions matter in my world, Evelyn." His world as if mine didn't exist at all. At the gala, surrounded by Boston's elite in a hotel ballroom dripping with crystal and privilege, I recognized several of my regular customers, including the restaurant critic who'd written Evelyn's first glowing review. I angled my body away, grateful I'd worn my hair differently than my usual work style. "And what do you do, dear?" asked the silver-haired wife of Derek's managing partner. Before I could answer, Derek's arm tightened around my waist. "Evelyn's just a waitress for now," he interjected smoothly. "At Evelyn's downtown. Quite a coincidence with the name, isn't it? Just a waitress." The words landed like small, precise cuts. "How quaint," the woman replied, her expression suggesting she'd discovered something unpleasant on her shoe. "And do you have plans for something more substantial?" Derek answered for me again. "We're exploring options at the firm, perhaps something in client relations." Later, in the taxi home, the silence between us stretched taut until I finally broke it. "You answered for me twice." "I was helping," Derek said, scrolling through emails on his phone. "Those people can be judgmental about waitresses." He sighed, taking my hand. "Sweetheart, you know your job doesn't matter to me. I make more than enough for both of us. I just don't want you to feel uncomfortable in these situations." I didn't feel uncomfortable until you spoke for me. The argument simmered without resolution, the first of many. Small comments accumulated like snowflakes, light individually but building toward an avalanche. Derek suggesting I look into secretarial courses, mentioning his colleague's wife who used to be a barista, before finding her true calling in event planning, leaving brochures for professional image consulting on the kitchen counter. My silent resistance only strengthened his campaign. I began finding job listings marked in red pen on the counter. Positions that required neither education nor experience. Administrative assistants, receptionists, retail associates. I'm not ashamed of being a waitress, I told him, after finding yet another circled want ad. Of course not, he replied, kissing my forehead. It's admirable how you've stuck with it. I just think you're capable of so much more. The irony burned like acid. Vanessa, my head chef and closest friend since culinary school, became my sole confidant during menu tastings and inventory reviews, meetings masked as friendly coffee dates to Derek. She witnessed my growing unease. This is madness, Ev, she said, chopping herbs with alarming precision in my restaurant kitchen after hours. You're running one of Boston's most successful restaurants while pretending to be Cinderella before the ball. For what? A man who thinks waiting tables is beneath him. It's complicated, I insisted, sampling her latest sauce creation. He has good qualities. He's driven, intelligent, caring when it matters. Caring when it's convenient, she corrected. What happens when he discovers the truth? Do you think his ego can handle learning his little waitress has been his boss all along? Men like Derek don't magically develop respect for things they've openly disdained. Her words haunted me for days, amplified by Derek's increasing suggestions about my career prospects. The engagement ring felt heavier each day, the deadline for truth drawing closer as Derek began mentioning wedding venues and dates. Then came the night I nearly confessed everything. I had prepared carefully. Financial statements demonstrating my success, press clippings about the restaurant, even the keys to my actual home in Back Bay. I'd made his favorite meal, ironically using the recipe from Evelyn's, and opened a bottle of wine we'd been saving. I need to tell you something important, I began as we finished dinner. Derek's face lit up. What a coincidence. I have news too, but you first. The earnest excitement in his eyes made me hesitate. Actually, you go ahead. I got the promotion. He practically bounded from his chair. Senior partner, effective immediately. The youngest in firm history. He pulled me up into a spinning hug, his joy infectious despite my internal turmoil. And you know what this means? A significant raise, a corner office, and, he paused dramatically, you can finally quit that waitressing job. He continued without noticing my frozen expression. No more late nights, no more serving other people. You can focus on planning our wedding, setting up our home properly. His hands framed my face. I told you I'd take care of everything, didn't I? I forced a smile, the folder of revelations burning a hole in my desk drawer where I'd hastily hidden it before dinner. Congratulations, I'm so proud of you. That night, as Derek slept peacefully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, Vanessa's warning echoing in my thoughts. The truth wouldn't set me free, not yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what would happen when Derek's perception of me shattered, when the power dynamic he'd carefully constructed inverted completely. The decision crystallized in the pre-dawn darkness. I would reveal myself, but on my terms, with witnesses who would ensure the truth couldn't be rewritten afterward. Derek had shown me who he was through 100 small moments. Now it was time for me to show him who I really was. My revelation would have to wait for the perfect moment. In the meantime, Derek's promotion accelerated both his ego and his presence at my restaurant. What had been occasional Friday dinners evolved into multiple weekly visits as he entertained clients, celebrated wins with colleagues, and established himself as a regular the staff needed to recognize. I want to reserve our special table again, he'd say on calls I now intercepted myself, amused by the irony. The corner booth with panoramic city views, the one he'd fallen in love with during our early dating days, was technically reserved permanently under Matthews, owner in our system. Of course, Mr. Shepard, I'd reply, professional as always. We'll have your usual table waiting. He never questioned how he always secured the most coveted spot in the restaurant, even during peak hours when waiting lists stretched weeks long. The satisfaction of exclusivity overrode any curiosity about why this particular table remained mysteriously available for him. Navigating Derek's increased patronage required elaborate choreography. I worked with Marco to ensure I only waited on Derek's table every third or fourth visit, enough to maintain our connection, but not so frequent it would interfere with my actual management duties or raise questions about coincidence. He's here again, Vanessa would text from the kitchen, our private signal prompting me to either don my waitress uniform or retreat to my office depending on our predetermined schedule. On nights I wasn't serving, I'd observe from strategic positions, reviewing wine selections with the sommelier, discussing menu adjustments with the maitre d', or simply pretending to dine alone at the bar. These vantage points provided unexpected insights into Derek's true character. With important clients, he was charm personified, attentive, generous with compliments, and liberal with expensive wine orders. With colleagues of equal or higher status, he maintained an easy camaraderie, laughing at their jokes while subtly inserting references to his own accomplishments. But with junior associates or support staff, a different Derek emerged, impatient, dismissive, measuring their worth by how quickly they anticipated his needs. Most revealing was his treatment of my staff. Derek's please and thank you appeared reliably for senior servers like Marcus and Sophia, vanished entirely for food runners and bussers, and fluctuated wildly for newer staff based on their performance. The incident with Ryan crystallized everything. He was 19, working to pay for community college classes, earnest and eager but still learning the choreography of fine dining service. It was only his second week when he was assigned to assist on Derek's table during a lunch with 3 potential clients. I was in the kitchen reviewing invoices when I heard the commotion, a crash followed by raised voices. Stepping onto the floor, I witnessed Ryan frozen in horror, a water pitcher clutched in his trembling hands, while Derek's associate frantically blotted his suit sleeve. Is this how you run your establishment? Derek's voice carried across the hushed dining room as he addressed Marco. Hiring incompetent children who can't even pour water? Ryan's face flushed crimson. Sir, I'm so sorry, I don't want your apology, Derek snapped, cutting him off with a dismissive wave. I want you gone. This suit costs more than you make in a month. I moved toward them instinctively, manager mode overriding fiancé concerns, but Marco caught my eye with a subtle head shake, a reminder of our precarious situation. Instead, I watched from behind a service column as Marco handled the situation with practiced diplomacy, offering sincere apologies, complimentary lunch, and vouchers for future visits. We'll address this with the server immediately, Marco assured them smoothly while signaling Ryan to retreat to the kitchen, where I followed him. He wants me fired, Ryan choked out, tears threatening. It was an accident. My hand just slipped. I placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. You're not getting fired for an accident, Ryan. This is a teaching moment, not a termination one. The relief in his eyes made the deception worth it, even as I processed Derek's casual cruelty. Later, when Derek called to express further outrage about that incompetent boy, I found myself maintaining my waitress persona while defending my management's decision to keep Ryan on staff. Marco said he's giving him another chance, I explained, my voice carefully modulated. Everyone deserves that, don't they? Not in business, Derek replied flatly. One mistake reflects poorly on everyone. If my associates think the restaurant tolerates incompetence, that reflects poorly on me for recommending it. His concern wasn't for the water-spotted suit or the momentary disruption, but for his own image. Another hairline fracture in the increasingly damaged picture I had of our relationship. As weeks passed, these fractures multiplied. Derek's complaints about my schedule intensified, particularly when I needed to cancel plans for legitimate restaurant emergencies that I could only vaguely explain. It's Tuesday night, he argued during one particularly heated exchange when a refrigeration failure required my immediate attention. You've already worked a full day. Why can't someone else handle a busy dinner service? It's complicated, I responded, gathering my keys. Tuesday nights are my responsibility. More important than our dinner with the Harringtons? They're only in town tonight and Richard could be a significant client. I'm sorry, but yes, this once it is. His expression hardened. I'm starting to think you're not serious about our future, Evelyn. A waitress job shouldn't take precedence over your fiancé's career. The words stung despite their inaccuracy. I was choosing my career over his, just not the career he thought I had. These arguments became our new normal, his frustration building with each rain check, each late night return to the condo, each morning departing before dawn. The engagement that had once felt promising now hung between us like an unasked question. The final crack appeared unexpectedly on a rare Sunday morning together. Derek was showering when his phone chimed repeatedly on the nightstand. Normally, I'd never invade his privacy, but the screen lit up with a name I recognized. Brandon, his closest friend and frequent dinner guest at Evelyn's. The preview displayed just enough text to catch my attention. Still can't believe you're marrying the waitress. Bold move, man. I shouldn't have looked. I knew that even as my finger pressed his password, my birth date, a gesture once endearing and now feeling calculated. The full message thread appeared, weeks of exchanges illuminated in damning blue bubbles. Marrying down keeps expectations manageable, Derek had written just yesterday. Plus, she's gorgeous and grateful for everything. Win-win. Classic savior complex, Brandon replied with a laughing emoji, rescuing her from a life of serving others. She'll make a perfect corporate wife once I polish off the rough edges. Each message burned deeper than the last, confirming every doubt I'd tried to dismiss. The Derek who spoke so gently to me, who promised partnership and respect, was an illusion carefully maintained for my benefit. The real Derek, the one who spoke freely with friends, saw our relationship as an exercise in benevolent control, a project, rather than a partnership. I replaced the phone exactly as I'd found it, my hands surprisingly steady despite the storm brewing inside. By the time Derek emerged from the shower, I'd composed my features into a mask of normalcy, excusing myself to pick up an extra shift, while my mind calculated a very different kind of shift about to occur. Driving toward Evelyn's, I finally admitted what I'd known for weeks. The revelation I'd been planning could no longer be a gentle unveiling of truth. It needed to be a reckoning, one that would force Derek to confront not just my deception, but his own. The text messages weighed on me all week, coloring every interaction with Derek. I scrutinized his expressions for signs of the condescension he'd revealed to Brandon, analyzed his compliments for hidden patronization. Though nothing had technically changed between us, everything felt different, as if a veil had been lifted, revealing harsh lighting where I'd once seen a warm glow. I might have confronted him immediately if not for the looming Sunday dinner at his parents' suburban estate. Derek had been orchestrating this meeting for weeks, dropping hints about its importance and coaching me on appropriate topics of conversation. Just be yourself, he'd said, then immediately contradicted himself with, but maybe don't talk too much about the restaurant. Another time? My mother appreciates people who dress with understated elegance. And later, Dad respects ambition, so focus on your goals, rather than your current situation. By Sunday morning, I'd received so many contradictory instructions that I felt like an actress without a coherent script. Standing in front of our closet, his closet, really, where my clothes occupied a carefully measured third of the space, I chose a simple navy dress that projected the understated elegance Derek had emphasized. Perfect, he approved, adjusting his tie in the mirror beside me. Conservative, but not boring. Dad will appreciate that. The drive to Westwood took 40 minutes, each passing mile ratcheting up Derek's nervous energy. He quizzed me about his parents' accomplishments, his father's law firm, which he'd built from nothing, his mother's chairmanship of 3 charitable boards, their preferences, Bordeaux wines, conservative politics, traditional gender roles, and their expectations. Grandchildren within 2 years, holiday gatherings at their estate, continuation of family traditions I hadn't known existed until that moment. "Remember," he said as we turned onto a tree-lined drive that seemed to stretch endlessly through manicured grounds. First impressions are everything to them. The Shepherd estate loomed ahead, a colonial revival mansion that wouldn't have looked out of place in a historical documentary. Standing at the mahogany front door, Derek squeezed my hand so tightly it hurt. "Ready?" I nodded, though in truth I felt anything but. The door opened before he could knock, revealing not his parents, but a uniformed housekeeper who ushered us through a marble-floored foyer into a formal living room, where the elder Shepherds waited. Patricia Shepherd rose first, a slender woman in her 60s with immaculate silver hair and the same sharp blue eyes as her son. "Derek, darling," she said, accepting his kiss on her cheek before turning her assessing gaze to me. "And you must be Evelyn." Her handshake was brief, her smile not reaching her eyes. Behind her, Richard Shepherd remained seated, a tumbler of amber liquid in one hand as he nodded in acknowledgement. "Sit down, son," he said, indicating the sofa across from him. "Tell me about the Harrington deal. Did they sign?" No greeting for me, no expression of pleasure at meeting his son's fiancé. Just business, immediate and exclusive. Derek launched into deal specifics, while I perched uncomfortably beside him, Patricia's gaze cataloging me with unsettling thoroughness. When a second housekeeper appeared with drinks, Derek automatically ordered for me without asking my preference. "White wine for my fiancé," he told the woman. "She prefers something sweet." I didn't actually. I preferred complex reds with earthy undertones, knowledge earned through years of wine tastings with suppliers and sommeliers. But contradicting him seemed petty in that moment, so I accepted the too sweet Riesling with a polite smile. "Derek tells us you work at Evelyn's." Patricia finally addressed me when the men's business discussion lulled. "Such a coincidence with your name." "Yes, it's become something of a joke among the staff," I replied, the half-truth coming easily after months of practice. "Waiting tables, is it?" Richard asked, his gaze sharpening. "Temporarily, I assume." "Dad," Derek interjected with a nervous laugh, "not everyone follows a traditional career path." "Clearly," Richard replied, the single word carrying volumes of judgment, "but surely there are plans for something more appropriate." He directed this question at Derek rather than me, as if I weren't capable of answering for myself. "We've discussed several options," Derek answered smoothly. "Client relations at the firm, perhaps, or event coordination. Evelyn has excellent people skills. I actually enjoy the restaurant industry," I said quietly, my voice steadier than I expected. "I find it fulfilling." Patricia and Richard exchanged a glance so laden with meaning, it might as well have been audible. Disappointment, concern, judgment. "Well," Patricia said with forced brightness, "being a waitress certainly teaches valuable skills, organization, patience with difficult people, following instructions precisely." "Like a well-trained dog," I thought bitterly. "Derek mentioned you attended culinary school," Richard pressed. "Yet you're serving food, rather than preparing it." Before I could answer, the conversation was interrupted by the dinner announcement. Throughout the elaborate 4-course meal, skillfully prepared by their private chef, the interrogation continued under the guise of polite interest. Did I have family money? No. Had I considered finishing my bachelor's degree? I had, along with my MBA, which I'd completed 3 years earlier. What were my thoughts on children, and the importance of being present for their formative years? A thinly veiled suggestion that my work hours were incompatible with proper motherhood. With each question, Derek stepped in to shape my answers into something more palatable for his parents, editing my life story in real time to fit their expectations. By dessert, I barely recognized the woman they were discussing. This simplified, aspirational version of Evelyn who just needed proper guidance to blossom into an appropriate shepherd wife. "You have potential," Richard told me directly as we prepared to leave. The statement landing like an insult, rather than the compliment he clearly intended. With Derek's guidance and the right connections, you could find a much more suitable position. Our family has standards to maintain. The silence in the car lasted until we'd cleared the estate's gates. Then Derek exhaled loudly, loosening his tie with one hand. "That went better than I expected," he said, oblivious to my simmering anger. "Dad actually said you have potential. That's high praise from him. Potential for what, exactly? To evolve beyond my embarrassing job to become suitable for your family?" Derek's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. "They're old-fashioned, Evelyn. You knew that going in. And frankly, you could have made more effort to highlight your strengths instead of repeatedly bringing up the restaurant." I answered their questions honestly. "Should I have lied?" "You should have emphasized your ambitions beyond serving food," he snapped, his carefully maintained facade cracking. "They're concerned about your integration into our social circle. Dad's colleagues' wives run charities, manage foundations, support their husbands' careers. They don't work nights and weekends carrying plates. So I'm an embarrassment. You're making this unnecessarily difficult." Derek's voice took on the same patronizing tone he'd used with Ryan after the water spill. "I'm trying to help you see the bigger picture. My world has certain expectations, and if we're going to build a life together, you need to aim higher. I'm doing you a favor by marrying someone with your limited prospects. The least you could do is show some willingness to adapt." There it was, the brutal truth I'd glimpsed in his text messages, now spoken aloud. The remaining drive passed in frigid silence, Derek occasionally sighing dramatically as if I were the unreasonable one. At home, he retreated to his office, door firmly closed, while I stood on the balcony, twisting the diamond ring that now felt like a brand of ownership rather than a symbol of partnership. Each facet catching the city lights reminded me of a different falsehood, a different compromise, a different piece of myself I'd allowed to be diminished. Later, I lay awake beside Derek's sleeping form, staring at the ceiling as clarity washed over me in waves. The charade had gone on too long, damaging not just our relationship but my own self-respect. I'd built a restaurant on principles of honesty, quality, and respect for everyone from dishwashers to diners. Yet I'd allowed myself to become entangled with a man who embodied none of those values. No more hiding, no more pretending, no more silent acquiescence. As dawn broke over Boston, painting the sky in shades of possibility, I slipped from bed and made my first call of the day. "Marco, it's me. I need you to make some changes to Thursday's reservations. Derek's bringing important clients. I want everything perfect." "The usual table?" he asked. "Yes," I confirmed, a plan crystallizing with exquisite clarity. "But this time, I'll be his server. And nothing goes wrong until I decide it does." The 4 days between my dawn decision and Thursday evening unfolded with a strange, calm clarity. I moved through our shared space like a ghost, avoiding Derek without appearing to do so. Early mornings at the restaurant, late nights reviewing inventory. He barely noticed, consumed with preparation for what he kept calling the meeting that will define my career. Tuesday afternoon, his call lit up my private line, the one reserved for actual restaurant business. "Reservation for Thursday at 7, he said without preamble, not recognizing my professional voice. "Derek Shepard, party of 4. I need the corner table." "Of course, Mr. Shepard," I replied, maintaining my professional tone while signaling Marco, who stood nearby reviewing staffing schedules, to listen in. "May I ask the occasion?" "Meeting with Japanese investors," he replied, pride evident even through the phone line. 7-figure potential deal. Everything needs to be perfect. Wine recommendations ready. No delays between courses. Your best server. I'll personally ensure everything meets your standards," I promised, the double meaning making Marco raise his eyebrows. Perfect. A pause. "And Evelyn." I froze momentarily before realizing he thought he was speaking to a reservation manager who merely shared my name. "My fiancé occasionally waits tables there. If she's working Thursday, please make sure she's nowhere near our section. It would be awkward." My fingers tightened around the pen I'd been using to note his preferences. "I understand completely, sir. We'll make appropriate arrangements." After ending the call, I met Marco's concerned gaze. "You heard?" He nodded slowly, every word. "Are you sure about this, Ev?" "I've never been more certain of anything," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "Call a staff meeting for tomorrow morning. Essential personnel only. Wednesday's meeting included only those I trusted implicitly. Marco, Vanessa, my sous chef James, and the senior servers who'd been with me since the beginning." Their expressions ranged from shock to vindictive delight as I outlined the situation and my planned response. "He doesn't deserve you," Vanessa said flatly when I finished. "Never did," she added. "This isn't about what he deserves," I corrected her. "It's about standing in my truth after hiding it for too long. No drama, no public scene, just fact and consequence." We spent 2 hours planning every detail, the precise timing of courses, who would serve the accompanying tables, the exact moment I would appear. James selected wines specifically paired to complement both the food and the mounting tension of the evening. Vanessa designed a special menu that showcased our most sophisticated offerings, dishes that required perfect precision and presentation. "What about the letter?" Marco asked quietly as the meeting concluded. I'd already drafted it, a simple, dignified statement revoking Derek's dining privileges, explaining that Evelyn's was built on respect for all, regardless of position, and that his consistent treatment of staff violated our core values. No emotional language, no accusation, just clear boundaries. "It's ready," I told him, along with the paperwork documenting my ownership, awards, and financial statements. "Everything will be in the check presenter when the moment comes." Thursday arrived with the crystalline perfection of early autumn. I spent the day in methodical preparation, a final review of the special menu with Vanessa, confirmation of the investors' backgrounds with James to ensure appropriate wine knowledge, a brief meditation in my office to center myself. At 5, I changed into what I'd privately labeled my Revelation uniform, not the standard black attire of our service staff, but a tailored dress in the same shade, subtle enough to function as waitstaff clothing while clearly signaling my actual position to anyone paying attention. My grandmother's small gold watch adorned my wrist, a reminder of where I'd started and the legacy I was protecting. Marco found me adjusting my hair in the staff room mirror at 6:30. They're 15 minutes out, traffic on the expressway. He placed a supportive hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. "We're all with you." I nodded, emotion threatening to crack my composed facade for the first time all week. "Thank you for everything." At precisely 7, Derek swept through our doors, 3 distinguished Japanese businessmen in tow. From my vantage point near the kitchen, I watched Marco greet them with professional courtesy, leading them to the corner table, my table, with its spectacular city view, now enhanced by the setting sun painting Boston skyline in hues of gold and amber. I allowed them time to settle, drinks ordered, pleasantries exchanged, menus presented. Through the kitchen pass, I observed Derek in his element, commanding the table with practiced charm, making a show of his familiarity with the restaurant, his confident wine selection, his casual reference to returning at least weekly to this neighborhood gem. At precisely the right moment, I stepped from the shadows, approaching their table with the composed grace I'd practiced since culinary school. Derek noticed me when I was 3 steps away. his expressions cycling rapidly from confusion to alarm to forced nonchalance. "Gentlemen," he said, voice pitched slightly higher than normal, "this is actually my fiancée, Evelyn. She works here." The executives offered polite nods as I smiled professionally. "Good evening and welcome to Evelyn's," I said, my focus deliberately inclusive of all four men rather than centered on Derek. "I'll be your server tonight. May I start you with sparkling water for the table?" Derek's laugh sounded strangled. "Sweetheart, I didn't realize you were working tonight. Isn't Sophia usually on this section?" "I wanted to personally ensure everything was perfect for your important meeting," I replied smoothly, pouring water with practiced precision. "Our chef has prepared several specials I believe would impress your guests." What followed was the most meticulously orchestrated service of my career. I described each dish with expert knowledge no mere server could possess, recommended wine pairings with the confidence of an owner, and maintained a professional demeanor that gave nothing away while setting the stage for everything to come. Throughout the meal, Derek's discomfort grew visibly. He interrupted my descriptions, rushed through wine selections, and repeatedly made small comments designed to diminish my role. "She's only doing this temporarily," he told the investors during the appetizer course, a deliberate emphasis on temporarily that made my spine stiffen. "Such dedication to service," the senior investor observed, clearly more impressed than Derek intended. By the main course, Derek's patience had visibly frayed. When I approached to check on their satisfaction, he cut me off mid-sentence. "We're fine, Evelyn. I think the gentleman would prefer to discuss business without constant interruptions." "Of course," I replied coolly, though as owner I find it valuable to ensure guests are enjoying their experience. The word owner hung in the air for a beat, before Derek forced another laugh. "She means she owns the responsibility for her tables. English idioms can be confusing." The investors nodded politely, but I noticed their shrewd glances. These were businessmen who recognized power dynamics shifting in real time. When dessert arrived, Derek's frustration finally boiled over. As I described the deconstructed chocolate torte, a recipe that had earned us a feature in Food and Wine, he cut me off harshly. "This is exactly why you need to quit this dead-end job," he hissed, forgetting his audience momentarily. Hovering over tables, prattling about food. "It's embarrassing." The table fell silent. The senior investor's eyes widened slightly. I straightened, feeling a profound calm settle over me. "I'll return shortly with your check, gentlemen." In the kitchen, Marco handed me the prepared check presenter without a word, his eyes conveying both support and concern. I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and returned to the table. "Thank you for dining with us tonight," I said, placing the leather folder precisely in front of Derek. "Inside, you'll find your bill along with a letter regarding your future dining privileges at Evelyn's, and documentation you may find informative." Derek opened the folder, confusion giving way to shock as he scanned the contents. "I should introduce myself, properly," I continued, addressing the investors directly. "I'm Evelyn Matthews, owner and founder of Evelyn's. I established this restaurant 8 years ago after graduating from the New England Culinary Institute, and have since been honored with 2 Michelin stars and numerous industry awards." The senior investor's face transformed with new respect and understanding, while his colleagues murmured appreciatively. "Matthews' son," he said, inclining his head slightly. "Most impressive establishment." "Thank you," I replied, then turned my gaze to Derek, whose face had drained of all color. "Unfortunately, Mr. Shepard will no longer be welcome here due to his consistent disrespect toward our staff, a core violation of our values. You gentlemen, however, are welcome any time." I slid my engagement ring from my finger and placed it gently beside the check presenter. "This belongs with you," I said quietly to Derek, "as does your perception of me as someone needing rescue. I wish you well, but not in my restaurant and not in my life." With that, I turned and walked away, my back straight, my steps sure, feeling lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. Behind me, I heard the senior investor say something in rapid Japanese, followed by the scraping of chairs. Whatever deal Derek had hoped to close that night unraveled as quickly as our relationship. But unlike him, I felt nothing but relief watching it all come apart. I didn't look back as I walked through the restaurant, past curious staff and oblivious diners. Marco fell into step beside me as I reached the kitchen. "It's done," I said simply. Vanessa abandoned her station at the pass, engulfing me in a fierce hug that smelled of rosemary and redemption. "You okay?" Surprisingly, yes, and I was. The weight of deception had lifted, leaving behind a curious lightness I'd forgotten could exist. "He's leaving," James announced, appearing in the kitchen doorway. "Looks shell-shocked. The investors are staying, asked to speak with the owner if possible." I smoothed my dress, squared my shoulders. "I'll meet them in the private dining room. James, bring a bottle of the Yamazaki 18. Hosting the Japanese executives afterward felt like my first authentic professional interaction in months. They were impressed by my business acumen, intrigued by my journey from culinary school to Michelin stars, and respectfully curious about my expansion plans. By evening's end, I'd secured not only their respect, but potential investment in my second location, a perfect, unexpected symmetry to Derek's shattered deal. "Remarkable recovery," the senior investor, Mr. Tanaka, commented as they prepared to leave. "Most impressive aspect of your business tonight." I didn't need to ask what he meant. In business, as in life, true character reveals itself in moments of disruption. The text began at midnight. Frantic, disbelieving messages from Derek, cycling through anger, bargaining, and wounded pride. I read each one just once before silencing my phone, sleeping more peacefully than I had in months. Morning brought a bouquet of lilies so enormous they barely fit through the door of my Back Bay brownstone, the home Derek never knew existed. The card read simply, "We need to talk, please." I donated the flowers to a nearby nursing home. Derek appeared at the restaurant the following evening despite the ban, looking haggard and humbled in a way I'd never seen before. 5 minutes, he pleaded when Marco moved to escort him out. Just 5 minutes with her. I agreed, more out of curiosity than compassion, meeting him in my office, the space he'd never known existed behind the unassuming door marked private. This is... He gestured helplessly at the tasteful decor, the wall of awards, the framed reviews. I don't understand, Evelyn. Why didn't you tell me? I tried initially, I replied, remaining standing while he perched uncomfortably on the edge of a visitor chair. But then I saw how you treated servers, how you spoke about people trapped in service jobs. And I realized something important. You didn't respect me as a waitress. Would you have dated me at all if you'd known the truth from the beginning? Of course I would have. You're successful, accomplished. Exactly. You would have respected my accomplishments, not me as a person. That's the difference, Derek. I wanted someone who valued people regardless of their position or status. You failed that test consistently. That's not fair. I loved you, he protested, looking genuinely wounded. You loved a projection, a convenient fantasy of rescuing someone you perceived as beneath you. You loved how I made you feel, not who I actually was. I can change now that I understand. That's just it, I interrupted gently. You shouldn't need to change to treat people with dignity. It should be fundamental. His expression hardened slightly, revealing the Derek I'd glimpsed in unguarded moments. This is about status for you, isn't it? Some twisted revenge because you felt judged. I smiled sadly. No, Derek. It's about integrity. The same standards I apply to my restaurant, my staff, and myself. I won't compromise on that, not for business and not for love. He left without further argument, the engagement ring in his pocket despite my suggestion that he donate it to charity. I suspected his pride couldn't handle that final submission. The following weeks brought more attempts, emails outlining how we could start fresh, messages from mutual acquaintances suggesting I was being harsh, even a desperate call to Vanessa seeking her intervention. Each attempt arrived with diminishing force and conviction, like waves gradually losing power as they reached shore. Meanwhile, I reclaimed pieces of myself I'd carefully hidden away. I moved fully back into my own home, the space that reflected my actual taste and achievements. I reconnected with industry colleagues I'd avoided for fear of exposing my charade. I even gave an interview to Boston Magazine about female entrepreneurship in the restaurant industry, finally stepping fully into the public role I'd earned. The final attempt came 6 weeks after that fateful dinner. Derek appeared at a charity gala I was catering, a prestigious event where I'd once hidden behind serving trays but now attended as a featured culinary artist. You look happy, he said, cornering me near the dessert display. The bitterness in his voice had faded, replaced by something approaching resignation. I am, I replied simply. I sold the ring, he offered after an awkward pause. Donated the money to a scholarship fund for culinary students. Thought you'd approve. The gesture surprised me, suggesting growth I hadn't expected. That's meaningful. Thank you. I've been thinking about what you said about respect being fundamental. He glanced around the gala, where servers circulated with trays of my creations. I never saw them before. The people behind the service. I'm trying to see now. It wasn't an apology exactly, but perhaps something more valuable. Evidence of reflection, the first step toward genuine change. That's a good place to start, I acknowledged, not unkindly. We didn't speak again that night or in the months that followed. Occasionally, I'd hear updates through industry channels. Derek had changed firms, had moved to Chicago, was dating someone new. Each piece of information affected me less than the last, until they became merely facts about a person I once knew intimately but no longer needed to track. A year after our separation, a small package arrived at the restaurant. Inside lay a leather-bound journal I recognized as one I'd admired in a shop window during our early dating days. The note read simply, "You were right. Keep building your empire. It's impressive as hell." I donated the journal to our culinary mentorship program but kept the note, not out of lingering attachment, but as a reminder of the power in standing firmly in one's truth, even when it's uncomfortable or inconvenient. Evelyn's expanded to 3 locations over the next few years. I maintained my Tuesday tradition of waiting tables, though the practice was now publicized as part of our philosophy rather than hidden. The corner booth, once reserved under my name for Derek's visits, became dedicated to a rotating program hosting culinary students, allowing them to experience fine dining many couldn't otherwise afford. On particularly busy evenings when every table hums with conversation and every plate returns empty, I sometimes pause in a quiet corner to watch the dance of service unfold around me. In these moments, I'm grateful for the painful lesson Derek inadvertently taught me, that a life compartmentalized is a life diminished, that hiding pieces of ourselves for another's comfort only leads to our own confinement. The engagement ring he reclaimed that night has been replaced by something more meaningful. A simple band I purchased myself, engraved with my grandmother's favorite saying, "Serve with pride, lead with grace." It adorns my right hand, a daily reminder that I am whole and complete in myself, defined not by whom I love or who loves me, but by the integrity with which I move through the world. Some might see my story as one of revenge, of a calculated gotcha moment designed to humiliate, but I know differently. It was never about bringing Derek down. It was about finally, after too long, allowing myself to stand fully in my power, refusing to be diminished for someone else's comfort or pride. That's not revenge, it's reclamation.